See if that works. Where's my bit to read out? It's here. Good evening, members. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I first have to read out the following webcasting notice. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet or filmed and will be capable of repeated viewing or another use by such third parties. If you are seated in the lower public seating area, it is likely that the recording cameras will capture your image, and this will result in the possibility that your image will become part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human and data protection rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should move to the upper public gallery. If I could just introduce us up here. My name is Councillor Paul Kesker, and I'm Chairman tonight of Plans East. To my left is Councillor Brian Rolfe, who is my Vice Chairman, and to his left, Rebecca Perrin from Democratic Services, and to my right, Jill Shingler, who is a Senior Planning Officer with the Council and will be presenting the applications. We will now take item 2. I take it that all speakers have been given the relevant advice. Okay, thank you. Item 3 is minutes, pages 9 to 34, with the alteration under A of the minutes. Do I have your approval to sign them as a true record of the last meeting? Thank you. Number 4, apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor McEwen and Councillor Hadley, and lateness for Councillor Stalker and Councillor H. Whitbread.
Thank you. 5. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Right. Councillor Avey.
Thank you, Chairman. Items 1, 2, 3 and 7 on agenda item 8. Non-pecuniary interest, as I'm Chairman of Epping Town Council and Chairman of Planning at Epping Town Council. I believe non-prejudicial, and I'll be staying to consider those items.
Thank you. Councillor Grigg.
Thank you. I'm declaring an interest in item 8, number 4, as one of the objector is known to me in his professional capacity, and I will leave the chamber.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I declare an interest? Agenda item 8, firstly item 2, a non-pecuniary interest in that the applicant is known to me, but it's non-pecuniary and non-prejudicial, so I will remain in the meeting for that one and vote. However, on item 7, not only have I got that interest because it is the same applicant, I am friends with the objector, and although it's not pecuniary, it probably is prejudicial. So I will therefore leave the meeting for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burrows?
Yes, item 1 and item 7, and they're non-pecuniary, and I will stay in the chamber.
Thank you. Councillor Brady?
Item 7, non-pecuniary interest, but I do know the objector, she lives in my road, and I do know the parish council spokesperson, because I'm in the parish council, but I will be staying until we vote.
Thank you. Councillor Phillip?
Thank you, Chairman. Agenda item 8, number 7. I know the objector, but it's non-prejudicial, and I shall remain in the chamber.
Thank you. Councillor Whitbread?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, on item 2 and item 7, I know the applicant and some of the objectors. I believe they're non-pecuniary interest, but I will leave the chamber for those 2 items. On item 15, I do know of the objector, but it's non-pecuniary, and I will remain for that one.
Thank you. And Councillor Bedford?
Item 8, I just know one of the speakers is non-pecuniary.
Okay.
Chairman, just quickly, just to correct myself, I said number 15, what I should have said was item number 8. I blame it on the eyesight this time.
I'll just make sure Rebecca's got all those, all your declarations down before we move on. Yes, got them all? Okay. Item 6 on the agenda, any other business?
No, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 7, local plan submission version, planning policy briefing note. This is simply to ensure that you are all aware that this is in place. In which case we will go on to item 8. But before I do, could I just ask Councillor Stalker, do you have any declarations of interest?
I don't, Chair.
Thank you. We'll now take item 8 then, development control. A, site visits. Is anyone proposing a site visit apart from those which we've already undertaken before this meeting? And can I thank both councillors and officers for giving the time to go on the last particular site visit?
Okay, TV's not working.
Okay, I'll mention that as well. Before we go on to the applications, could I say that the television screen before the committee members is not working. We can't even get channel 1 on it at the moment, so I'm afraid you're going to have to look at the one opposite or the screen above the chair with all its imperfections. Right, Jill. Oh yes, I should tell everyone I will be a voting chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 1 then is 12 Station Road, Epping, and it's an application for the demolition of the existing dwelling and the erection of 9 self-contained apartments incorporating revisions to the vehicular access and parking for 9 vehicles. So the application site is on the corner of Station Road and Nichols Road, and is site as shown there on the aerial photo. Has quite a large property with a single-storey rear extension at the rear, and the proposal is to provide the flats within similar footprint to the existing building, but with the elements at the rear being 2.5-storey rather than single-storey. And it changes the accesses to the site slightly and is to provide 6 parking spaces at the front and a further 3 at the rear, and a cycle storage and bin store to the rear here, with an area of amenity space retained here. The design is as shown here, so as I say, it's 2.5 stories. This is the front elevation facing onto Station Road. It's been split with 2 gables, and it has 2 doors into the ground floor flats, and resembles a pair of semi-detached houses. The side elevation facing onto Nichols Road has been split into different stages. It drops down slightly from the front and has 3 gabled features to break up the frontage. And this is the rear elevation. So again, you can see how it's stepped, and that's the rear elevation that faces towards the nearest property in Station Road. You'll see that there are no significant first floor windows facing towards that residential property, and there is a condition proposed that any windows that are in that elevation are obscured glazed. So that's the configuration. Again, you can see how it steps back from the boundary with the adjacent property in Station Road to reduce the impact on that property. and that's how it fits in within the street scene in terms of heights. Station Road, as you know, drops down a hill, so the properties in Nichols Road are at a higher level, and they're quite prominent properties along here. The one along there does have similar rooms within the roof space, and it's a similar kind of height. The next door property in Station Road is on a lower level and has a lower roof height, so this will be relatively prominent. But it is a corner location where you would expect to find quite prominent properties. So that's just a photo of the site as existing. And this shows the nearest property along the return road, which is a much lower level property, which is quite close to the boundary. So the main issues are potential impact on neighbouring properties from the development, but we think that it has taken concerns of neighbours into account and is set away from the shared boundary, has no overlooking windows, and although it's a larger bulk, there's no direct and significant overshadowing from the proposal, nor is there overlooking of the rear amenity space of number 1, Nicholl Road. And in visual amenity terms, we think that the proposal has taken into account the mix of development that's around there and has been designed, certainly from Station Road, to look like a pair of semis. And in Nichols Road, it's a similar kind of bulk to properties on the other side of the road that's broken up by the change in height and the articulation in the elevation. So it is recommended for approval. However, it is subject to a legal agreement, as nearly all applications for new dwellings in the Epping Forest district at the moment are subject to the applicants entering into a legal agreement to provide mitigation measures in terms of the impact on the Epping Forest special area of conservation. And the details of that are set out in the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. We have 3 speakers. Before all our speakers start, could I just remind you, please, to obviously turn your microphones on, as that helps with the webcast, and also to turn them off when you are finished. So our first speaker is James Davison, an objector. You have 3 minutes, sir.
My name is James Davison and I live at number 4 Nicholl Road opposite the development, and we object to the development. There are 6 planning grounds why this council should reject the application. The first of which is its overdevelopment. Secondly, it has an entirely negative impact on the street scene. It creates a great deal of overlooking on Nicholl Road where there is none at present. It is an entirely unsympathetic design. It would be detrimental to local amenity, and it will place an additional demand on resources due to the density of occupation, in particular parking resources. There are 15 local objections to this proposal. I trust you've read them all. They've been summarised very briefly in the councillor's document, in the authority's document. But I'd ask you to note the consistency of the objections. They include the Town Council. You already have the rules by which you can reject this proposal. They are policy CP7, policy H3A on housing density, and policy DB3E9 on the loss of amenity. With respect to overdevelopment, because of the size, height and length of frontage of what is presently mostly a single-storey property, this is overdevelopment. The footprint on all 3 of the stories is greatly increased, and to describe the present proposal as a 2.5 storey development is inaccurate to the point of being misleading. Each of the proposed stories appears to be taller than the present stories. Therefore, the roofline of the present building on number 12 will be raised significantly up to the present chimney line. And they will be fully occupied on each of those stories, the top floor having three properties on it. The properties as proposed, comprise 12 possible bedrooms. We don't know how many people may end up living there. With respect to the impact on street scene, this development will dominate Nickel Road along a longer frontage than at present and will be much closer, indeed the closest property to the street along that development, along full 3 stories. With respect to overlooking, there will be 10 new windows created onto Nickel Road where there are none. They will be directly looking into my bedrooms and those of my neighbours on either side. Presently there's none. It is an overbearing and overshadowing development which will literally block out the sunrise in the morning. Of course, matters of design are subjective, but I would suggest that due to the multi-storey nature, the multi-occupancy nature on a street of private houses, this is inconsistent with the street of Nickel Road and much of Station Road. With respect to the demand on resources, we don't know how many cars are going to be there. There are not enough compared to Essex County Council's guidelines, which is more than 9 at present, and 9 is only being offered by the development. We don't know how the parking will be owned. That is to say, the parking might be sold separately to the properties themselves. There are concerns about water pressure in the area. You'd be setting a poor precedent by accepting this development in its present form. Yes, it's in a conservation area, but we suggest that the line should not be a precipice, and once you cross it, the standards of design drop off immediately. Reference has been made to your supply requirements. This development makes a barely perceptible assistance to those and goes no way to solving that dilemma.
Wind up now, please, because you've had your...
We'd ask you to refuse this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. If you could turn your microphone off. Our second speaker is Councillor Scruton of Epping Town Council. You also have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Yes, the Town Council object to this proposal. It's an overdevelopment of the site in terms of its scale, height, bulk, overlooking, overbearing and density, which would result in a detrimental effect on the street scene. The proposal will result in a massive loss of amenities for nearby neighbouring, as you've just heard. It will affect them in terms of loss of light, overshadowing and visual impact. Committee do not feel this flats development mix is in keeping with the street scene. There is insufficient parking. The proposal does not offer enough car parking for both potential residents and visitors. There are severe parking issues already in Epping, and the insufficient parking from this scheme will put additional pressure on the surrounding roads. This proposed development would be located on an already busy and congested junction. The vast increase in the number of cars accessing and leaving the site will be detrimental to highway safety and the character of the area. Committee strongly object to the loss of a large family house, as houses are as necessary as flats, and do not feel that this is the most suitable location. A mix of dwelling types is required, and removing large family homes does not contribute to this objective. This proposal would also create an unwelcome precedent to the area. Generally, there isn't enough amenity space within the proposed proposal. You will note that 14, and I hear it's more now, it's 18 letters of objection have been submitted from local residents. New developments like this, which are out of character and result in unsympathetic change, overdevelopment and loss of amenity, should not be permitted. Committee do not agree with the planning officer that this site would make more efficient use of this previously developed site, and I would ask councillors to take account of the impact on the street scene, the effect on neighbouring properties, parking and the effect on highways, particularly at peak times when traffic coming from the station. The local plan states that the appearance of new developments should be compatible with the character of the surrounding area and should not prejudice the environment of occupiers of adjoining properties. This development is not in character with the surrounding area, and I ask you to object to this flats development in this location.
Thank you. Our third speaker is Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Allen, the applicant's agent. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, thank you very much indeed for attending the site visit the other day, so you can appreciate better the details of this proposal in context. The proposal has been very carefully considered and designed to fit in with the context of the site and its surroundings and to complement the nearby conservation area. The building has a main element on Station Road with a lower wing fronting onto Nickel Road, thus the design fits well in this corner plot. The design of the building takes its influence from the surrounding housing stock and makes use of the materials that are well established in the locality. The proposal does resemble, indeed, a pair of detached dwellings on Station Road and presents a terrace onto Nickel Road. The footprint of the building is very similar in size to the existing dwelling. There is no issue of overlooking, and the amenities all comply with the published guidelines with regard to amenity space and car parking. The Highways Department are happy with the siting of the vehicular access and the retention of car parking spaces on Nickel Road for general public use, and we've been careful to retain the existing available on-road car parking. The site cannot be said to be an overdevelopment, as we have met all the amenity space requirements and the car parking standards as published. The existing dwelling is not only a family home, it's also a busy clinical practice. As such, there are cars visiting the site all day long. Traffic generated by 9 apartments will be less than the existing use. This is accepted by the Highways Department and the Planning Department. The principle of apartments in this part of the town has been well established. There are many examples of them within a short distance of this site. 2 blocks have been built in Hemel Street, comprising 6 number 2-bedroomed apartments, each with 1 parking space each. There's 17 Hartland Road that was converted into 5 apartments, and there's another development going on at the moment at Kendall Avenue for 4 apartments. There are others, of course, in the officer's report. Just reading from the officer's report, he says that at the current time the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, and due to this it's been shown in several recent decisions, both within and without the district, that the lack of demonstrable 5-year housing supply weighs in favour of granting planning permission in situations such as this. Such matters weigh in favour of the development. I submit that this is a windfall site for 9 units. As it doesn't contradict any published relevant policy, and there are no sound reasons for refusal, I would refer you to the case officer's conclusion in his report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, the recommended decision is to grant permission subject to legal agreement. Councillors. Councillor Avey.
Thank you, Chairman. I couldn't go to the site visit, but I have walked around the site to look at it, given I live near Kendall Avenue. And I've toiled long and hard with this one. I can see what the developer is trying to achieve, but I come down again on the fact that I think this doesn't fit. The site doesn't fit what they think it's going to do. I think it doesn't look like a house. It doesn't look like the property it's replacing. I'm worried about the impact on Nickel Road, as some of the objectors have said. I think it's very bulky. I'm very worried that if we accept this, and I know there's no precedent in planning law, that there'll be a cascade of these down Station Road, because basically next door to it is another house that could be knocked down, another block of flats, and so on, until we stop at the station, frankly. So I am very concerned about that. I'm concerned about decent houses being knocked down to make blocks of flats as an issue anyway. I'm worried about the parking. Frankly, Epping has an enormous parking problem, and we can't afford any more spilling out onto the streets from people living in flats who need to find parking spaces. It just can't go on. So, frankly, I think I'm coming down on the fact that I won't support this application. I think it's wrong, and I think it's overdevelopment.
Thank you. Councillor John Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, the site visit was arranged for a time I couldn't make, but I walk past this site several times a week, and I did look at it particularly in the light of the planning application. And I think the words that sort of came to mind, looking through the plans, looking through bits, were sort of quart and pint pot. I mean, there's a plot of land here, and because there's an attempt to cram so many units into the plot, you end up with a very bulky and, in my view, unsatisfactory building. It ends up being higher than it otherwise would be if it was design-led, because you have effectively the full 3 stories of the crown roof rather than a more traditional approach. You end up with, rather than the current building, which, as we heard, has a large portion of single story, you're going up 3 stories as much over a much larger area of the plot. So, the footprint issue, in a sense, is a bit of a red herring, because you're adding those extra stories, it's an awful much more bulkier building. And I think with number 14 in particular, there may not be windows overlooking on that side, but certainly in terms of the outlook from that house, there is, I think, an impact. And it means, for example, that there is less amenity space. It may meet the criteria, but there's less amenity space and more hard landscaping and less green landscaping on the plot than there otherwise would be. I don't really agree that because it's a corner plot, you'd accept a bigger and bulkier building than you would otherwise. That may be true of main roads, avenues in Bath, formal sets like that. But I think in a more, suburban area like this is, you'd expect buildings to fit more into the rhythm of the existing street scene rather than break it up. So for those various reasons, I'll be voting against. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I won't repeat what's been said. I do agree with what's been said by Councillor Whitehouse and Councillor Avey and Councillor Scruton as well. I just want to pick up on the precedent bit on page 42. It's been said that it won't be precedent because there's flats at Station Road and Hemnall Street. I don't think you can count Hartland Road. It's been there, 17 Hartland Road, for such a long time. But to me, that's a different section of the High Street. That is the road, Hemnall Street, the road that's parallel to the High Street, and I feel it's part of the High Street development, all those flats that have come there. Once you get onto the next road, Nickel Road, you're into a different sort of development. You're into the family houses. And to put a flat on the corner there, this big flatty development, I think it will cause a precedent. And as Councillor Avey said, they'll go on down to the station. I don't see why Epping should suffer because of this lack of 5-year land supply. We keep hearing that. And, we want to preserve the character of our town. And I'm totally against this development at this particular site.
Thank you. Do I have any other councillors? Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually think this is quite a balanced decision. There's things that sit on both sides. There are things that have been referred to as reasons for not approving it, which I don't believe that we can rely on from a planning committee point of view. The parking one, we've got a number of inspector decisions that make it very clear that provision at this level is acceptable in this location. We have a highways authority saying there isn't a problem with highway safety. We can't rely on that. I'm not convinced around the loss of amenity. We don't determine planning applications on whether they set a precedent or not. We have to consider each application on its own merits. It's very clear with the updated NPPF that came out in July that one of the things that is being driven is efficient use of land and greater density within built-up areas. Just to take something that Councillor Whitehouse just mentioned, we have to take a note of the 5-year land supply because we know that that's in legislation to be looked at, and also the inspectors will take that into account. Those are all things I think that sit on the side of the officer's report. I think there are a number of things that sit on the far side. The impact on the street scene. I agree the design as you come up Station Road is probably in reasonable keeping with the street scene. I'm not convinced that the side view on Nickel Road with its bulk there is something that fits in with the street scene. And from that point of view, I don't think the design actually works particularly well to minimise the impact there. So I don't think it's in character with the area. And as such, as I say, it's a balanced decision, but I'm tending towards not supporting this.
Thank you. Any other councillor have a view? In which case we'll go to a vote. The recommended decision is to grant permission. All those in favour, please show.
It's none, Chairman.
Those against?
It's 13, Chairman.
And abstentions?
It's 3, Chairman.
Thank you. In which case, that's not been carried. I need a proposal for refusal. Would someone like to? Yes, Councillor Whitehouse.
Your reasons, I assume. Yeah. I think it's in terms of the bulk and the impact on the street scene and the amenity of neighbours.
Okay, thank you. Jill, are you happy with that?
Happy with going with the bulk and visual impact on street scene being out of character. Can you specify what it is in terms of impact on the amenity of neighbours that you're concerned about?
Well, principally, I think of outlook. Sort of oppressive, and the bulk leads to sort of oppressive outlook.
To number 14.
Okay, you happy with that, Jill? Well, a proposal has been made to refuse. Can I have a seconder, please, for that? Thank you, Councillor Avey. All those in favour of refusal for the reasons given, please show.
Chairman.
Against? And abstentions?
It's just the one, Chairman.
One, thank you. In which case, Planning Permission is refused. Do we have to give a way forward now? No, yes. We're relieved of having to give a way forward. Still need?
Suggest a way forward.
A suggested way forward. Would the committee think that perhaps a smaller number of flats on this site, if such an application came forward, would be more acceptable? Yeah, a smaller building.
Smaller building, they could have less flats, but they could still be huge.
Yes, okay. All right, well, that appears to be our recommendation. Right.
I forgot to declare an interest. I have the objector on this one. It's not the first one. Shall I do it now?
Okay. Yes.
No, this one.
Oh, this one next, yeah. Could I just ask, Councillor Bolton, do you have any declarations of interest? Thank you. And Councillor Rolfe?
Sorry, I do apologise. I should have said that on the next item, item 2, I declare a non-pecuniary interest in that I do know the objector.
Okay, thank you. Right, Jill, application number 2.
Item 2 then is 1 Buttercross Lane, Epping, and the application is to demolish the existing house and replace it with 9 apartments in a block. Site location, Buttercross Lane here, which is a narrow cul-de-sac. Basically it ends in a public footpath at the end. And the proposal is to knock down the existing dwelling here and erect, as I say, 9 apartments. That's 8 2-bed and 1 3-bed apartment. From the aerial photo, this is the plot here. You can see it's just behind the main buildings fronting onto the high street. And there are other residential properties down the road. So these are the plans. The proposal is a 2.5/3 storey building with the apartments within it. That's the elevation fronting onto Buttercross Lane. You can see it does drop down. The height is slightly lower than the height of the fronting buildings, but higher than the property to the right. And the footprint of the building, it's a little bit difficult to see on the block plan, but this is the other way up. If you're looking at the block plan, the footprint of the building that's proposed is the dashed line here. So the side that's adjacent to the neighbouring property is that element there, and it goes deeper into the site at the other side of the site where it faces on to the rear of the backs of the commercial properties in the high street. The access into the site would be taken over to here at the boundary with the adjacent property, and the proposal includes parking at the rear. There is a cycle store area there, and the bin storage is proposed within the building here. So that's about there within the site. There are some existing trees within the site along this boundary. The proposal is to take those out, but there will be some significant replacement trees and landscaping to help soften the development. That's the remaining elevations. So the elevation facing towards the nearest residential property. Again, none of the side-facing windows in this element are not obscured glazed, i.e. they are all obscured glazed to prevent any overlooking. And this is the element facing towards the backs of the properties in the high street. Again, probably easiest to show you this. This is the CGI of the proposed development. This is looking up from one end of Buttercross Lane towards the high street. So this is the existing dwelling that's proposed to remove, and this is what's to replace it. So you can see the design is to, it takes its cues really from the adjacent, on the other side of the road, property with weatherboarding and slate roof, and the proposal does drop down in height beyond the where this element is. I haven't explained that very well, but I hope that's sufficient. We have received a lot of objections to the proposal with regard to the design impact on the street, and more particularly, I think, with regard to the access and the nature of the road really being unsuitable for this increase in use. As I say, it is a very narrow road, and it doesn't serve a huge amount of dwellings, but again, highways have not raised any objections, and in this location, close to the high street, where the units are small, it's considered that the parking that's proposed is sufficient, and the access is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Again, we have three speakers. Our first speaker is Mr. Jeff Clark, who is an objector. You have 3 minutes.
Buttercross Lane is a unique part of Epping of sufficient importance to merit conservation status for half the length of the lane. There are two distinct areas, with the commercial buildings extending for 1/4 of the length and the residential development for the remaining 3/4. The more dominant residential development consists of 10 two-storey detached properties with one bungalow. Numbers 1, 3, 5 and 2 all lie within the conservation area, where there are safeguards as to development. Number 2 has been the subject of 3 applications in recent years. The first proposed only 5 flats within a two-storey building. The second application was for 2 detached dwellings. Both were refused on appeal on the grounds of overdevelopment and the cramped appearance in the street scene. The third application was submitted for 1 detached dwelling. This was approved on appeal with the inspector's request that the dwelling be positioned on the northern side of the site, and the height of the new dwelling should not exceed the height of the adjoining dwelling at number 4, precluding any form of 3-storey development. I refer now to the application details before you, whereby a large dominant 3-storey built form is proposed. The overall depth is 23.7 metres. The average depth of dwellings in the residential part of the lane is about 8 or 9 metres. The depth of building proposed is excessive, And I put to the planning committee a situation where a neighbour has applied for a rear extension to their property that would be 15 metres long, measuring from the rear wall of their house 3 stories high with a pitched roof on top. This would be quite unacceptable under normal circumstances, but we are dealing with such an extension within a conservation area, at which time the trees will be removed, open space will be removed, and by approving this application, a precedent will be set for similar development in the lane. No provision exists for on-site turning space or visitors parking. Random parking in the lane rarely happens, causing inconvenience to the residents and potential problems for emergency vehicles and rubbish collection. On 2 occasions in the last 4 months, the police have been called out to sort out traffic congestion in the lane. There will be 10 properties remaining in Buttercross Lane, and the construction of 9 flats will virtually double the number of traffic movements as far as the residential part of the lane is concerned. The existing density for the residential part of the lane is 13 dwellings per hectare. Should this application be approved, this will reflect a density of 90 dwellings per hectare, an increase of 700%, reflecting the extent to which the proposal is gross overdevelopment. The authority has a statutory duty to maintain and preserve conservation areas and, where possible, to improve and enhance them. By no stretch of the imagination can the application under consideration be thought an improvement in this context. It contravenes the policy of the authority, as it would be detrimental to the character, appearance and setting of the conservation area. It is not sympathetic to the existing development in the terms of scale, density, massing and height. On behalf, therefore, of the owner-occupiers of the residential part of Buttercross Lane, I request that this application be refused, so as to maintain the present appearance and character of this unique, attractive and historically important part of our market town for the immediate and long-term future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. If you could turn your microphone off. Our next speaker is Councillor Scruton again.
Thank you very much. Yes, the committee strongly object to this application. The proposal will have a dramatic and negative impact on the conservation areas we've already heard. The proposal is a vast overdevelopment of the site in terms of density and height, having 3 stories, which would result in an overly dominant and irreversible effect on the street scene. The proposal would decimate the street scene of this historic lane and the character of the road, which would be lost. The whole development does not fit with this part of the conservation area. The size and dominance of the building would create a tunnelling effect. The density far exceeds that which is laid out in policy, again as we've heard. The intensification of use from a detached family home to 9 individual apartments would impact adversely on the surrounding area in terms of visual impact, noise nuisance, disturbance and additional traffic. The vast increase in numbers of vehicles using the property would have a harmful effect on the highway safety and on the character of the area. There is no allowance for visitors parking to the flats. There are severe parking issues, again in Epping, and insufficient parking from this scheme would add to the problems. Buttercross Lane is a narrow road and it's a non-through road. And this proposal would increase the danger for pedestrians using the big, busy high street, as all the traffic has to go across the high street pavement, and it would make access difficult for emergency vehicles as well as refuse vehicles. Committee does not feel that this is a sustainable location for flats and objects to the loss of a large family house. A mix of dwelling types is required, but removing the large family homes does not contribute to this objective. This development will alter the core character of this historic lane. National policy states that the character of individual areas must be taken into consideration, and this development does not respect the conservation area of our town centre. Local and national policies state that the emphasis should be improving the quality of life in urban areas, not reducing the quality for future generations. Constantly allowing flats at the expense of family houses reduces the mix of dwelling types available and thus reduces choice. There would be a loss of trees and a loss of greenery, which would generate increased pollution. The resulting loss of amenity for neighbouring properties in terms of its overbearing nature, visual impact, additional traffic and nuisance is not acceptable and contravenes policy. The local plan states that the appearance of new developments should be compatible with the character of the surrounding area and should not prejudice the environment of occupiers adjoining property. This development is not in character with the surrounding area. New developments like this, which are out of character and result in unsympathetic change, overdevelopment should not be permitted. To summarise, the committee does not feel this development is in keeping with protecting the quality of the rural and built-up environment. It is not in keeping with sustainable urban development patterns. It will have a detrimental effect on neighbouring properties and an excessive loss of amenity. There is insufficient parking. Additional traffic will be dangerous to both traffic and pedestrians. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Could you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. Our third speaker is Mr. David Shaw, the applicant. You have 3 minutes as well, sir.
Good evening, councillors. Ira Homes is a small family house builder who use local trades and suppliers. We have had many pre-application meetings, and all of the advice received has been incorporated into our proposed design solution. Quoting from the feedback of EFDC senior planning and conservation officers, the proposed scale and massing of the replacement building is found to be acceptable. The proposal sits comfortably within the street scene and does not overwhelm the neighbouring properties. All of the professionals and experts consulted as part of the planning process have endorsed this proposal, including senior planning officers, conservation officers, the Director of Essex Highways, the Tree and Landscape Department, Essex Fire Department, and the Waste Management Department. However, objections have been raised that we believe are misguided. It was suggested that the site compared with the setting of number 2 Buttercross Lane, which was the subject of an appeal around 10 years ago. Nothing could be further from the truth. The site is next to the commercial buildings of the High Street and opposite Doubleday House, a dominant 4-storey block of flats, and opposite a large commercial car park. This is the setting of the proposed development, and in this setting it cannot be considered overdevelopment. Planning officers agree with this assessment. It was suggested the development would create a tunnel effect within Buttercross Lane. Again, nothing could be further from the truth, as shown by the CGI that has been prepared by a reputable CGI company. The proposal sits 6 metres from the pavement line, and the roof design steps down towards number 3 to mitigate any impact. Overall, the proposal is much less dominant than Doubleday House opposite. Again, planning officers concur with this assessment. It was suggested the development would result in the lot of a family home, which fails to recognise that we will be creating 9 family homes. Market research clearly shows the need for apartments for first-time buyers and downsizers. Regarding parking and traffic, according to the Essex Highways official report, parking provision is acceptable, traffic created is insignificant, and highway safety is not affected. Buttercross Lane already serves as access to 2 large commercial car parks used by office workers and delivery drivers on a daily basis. Regarding trees and landscaping, it should be noted that EFDC have no objection on this point, and the landscaping scheme provides for considerable new planting of mature native species, providing a natural screen along the boundary with number 3. Regarding the petition, a small number of objectors have gone to great lengths to attempt to block this proposal. None of the petition signatories have scrutinised the proposed plans, and given the population of Epping, the response to the petition is insignificant. To summarise, planning officers have recommended approval, and we would politely request that the council do likewise. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Members, the recommended decision is to grant permission, subject to legal agreement. Councillor Avey.
Thank you, Chairman. Bit of deja vu, because some of the comments I'm going to make could have applied for the first application. I've had a chance to carefully look at this application again, and I note the weight of residents' opinion against this. I don't think you can dismiss this number of objections. I think they're right to be concerned. I think that this is overdevelopment in terms of density and height. And the issue here is really that this is very close to the conservation area. And I think this development will deter against, will damage that conservation area if we allow it. And I would think this is not the right development in this location. And once again, we're losing a family home. Frankly, I just can't support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually found this site visit to this site on Saturday very helpful indeed. I respect what Councillor Avey has just said, but I actually come to a different conclusion from him. I think this is a significantly different application to the one we looked at previously. We did spend a significant amount of time there, looking both from the application site and from the neighbouring site, and from Buttercross Lane itself. And I actually walked into the car park at the back of Wildwood and looked from there as well. I think on balance, given what we're being driven to do in terms of intensification within built-up areas in the NPPF, this actually is a good use of this particular site. It was very useful to be able to see the various areas, see where the changes are going to be made, and I can't see any good planning reasons for refusing it. I do take on board what Councillor Avey was saying about weight of public opinion, but from a planning point of view, I will be supporting this application.
Thank you. Councillor Janet Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. For those members who weren't able to come on the site visit, this is Buttercross Lane, is the little lane that goes between Fatface and the card shop in the High Street. It's one of the most characteristic little lanes that we've got in Epping. Adds to the special sort of aspect of Epping. As you go into Buttercross Lane, it's true you've got flats, you've got the shops, you've got the flats above, and Doubleday House behind sort of joins onto that. I have never found Doubleday House dominant when I've walked down. I think there's only 4 flats in that building, and the bottom is set right back with the entrance doors. It doesn't feel it's like a sort of big block of flats. When you come to the end of Doubleday House, you've got an open area of car parking, yes, but it still feels open. On the other side, you come to the end of Fatface and the flats, and you've got another sort of open area. This property really starts the next section of the road, which is residential, small houses, as has been said by one of the objectors, and a road that really becomes a walkway. Very little traffic goes down there. I can't remember in all the times I've walked down there ever seeing a car come on that particular part of the road. I'm sure it must occasionally, people must come out their garages and go, but I've never seen it. And it's very much a walkway where people come through from Rayfield, they come through from the Beaconfield estate. And I think this is an undesirable development in that particular part. It dominates the house next door from the street scene that we were shown. And I think it's far too big and bulky for that particular site.
Thank you. Councillor Greig.
Thank you, Chairman. I have concern about this application, and when I see on the report that the officer says the words "on balance," the proposal is not considered to harm this part, that means to me it's a very close decision, really, when the officer has come down on one side, and when I look at it, I think I probably would come down on the other side. I just mentioned that I think many plans can be scrutinised by the computer. They can look at that, and members of the public have no doubt been doing that. I find that this is just a step too far for me, so I will not be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Brady.
Thank you. I couldn't go on the site visit, but I went down myself and had a look, so that familiarised me with it, with the position. Yes, it's interesting in one way because I think the applicant has made a very good effort with the design by mirroring the building opposite. I think that's quite a clever design, but however, we're talking about 8 two-bed and 1 one-bed, that's 17 beds going where, 17 bedrooms going where there's just one house at the moment. And that road is amazingly narrow. It's amazingly nowhere to park down it at all. And its egress onto the high street is at one of the busiest parts of the high street, with people constantly going backwards and forwards. So the conclusion that there would be the traffic increase would be absolutely negligible when it's serving a 17-bedroom place with 9 parking places. I disagree. Relative to the size of that road and the way the road comes out across the pavement there's hardly any delineation between road and pavement, and I think that would be overdevelopment and dangerous. But I do see that it's towards the town centre. I do see why they're asking for more, and as I say, I think the design is clever, but again, on balance, I think it's a little bit too much here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burrows?
Actually, I would say that this does have a tunnelling effect. That's how it looks to me. So on that count, I'm not happy with it, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Bedford?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I have to agree with Councillor Phillip actually on this one. We spent a lot of time actually looking very carefully at this development. And I found it very useful actually that the applicant had marked out the ground with rather large stakes so we could actually see the actual impact that was going to be on the property. On balance, I think it's quite sympathetic to the area. I know there are concerns about the parking in the area, and we also considered when we went down there that when you swing into the property, the actual entrance that's going to be created was quite large, and it's also opposite the area which is the main car park on the other side of the road, so there's plenty of room to swing in, so I didn't see a problem with that. With regard to the trees, I felt that I actually climbed through the bushes to have a look and see whose side of the fence they were on, and we found that they were in the applicant's garden, so they will be going. They are quite mature trees, but not much of in significance for native species, but we hear that the applicant's going to replant trees, which is always a good thing, and they're going to be mature trees, not little saplings that are just put in the ground and die within 6 months. Overall, I think that the look of the picture with the CGI image as well is quite, I think that sells it for me in as much as that it is trying to mirror the property opposite in keeping with the area and sympathetic to the conservation area. And I believe that the application, I'm in support of the application.
Thank you. So, Councillor Jones?
Thank you, Chairman. I found the site visit on Saturday extremely useful for this site. It is balanced. I can see that it's balanced, but I really don't know that we've got any firm grounds for refusal on this one. If the Double J house isn't perceived to be dominant, I certainly don't think this new development is going to be dominant. And the fact that they've set it back, matching the current building line, I think will avoid that. I think the right-hand wall where the access is has been brought in a good metre from the current place, admittedly to allow access, but that will diminish the impact on the adjoining property. Highways have not objected to this. Conservation haven't objected. And as the applicant has said, there's been discussions throughout. So at the moment, I'm veering towards supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillor have a view before we go to a vote? No, in which case the recommended decision is to grant permission. All those in favour, please show.
Seven, Chairman.
Thank you. Against?
7, Chairman.
And abstentions?
Should be 1.
1.
I would suggest that possibly somebody put forward a reason for refusal and see whether there's a or stand here for district development. Yeah, with no recommendation, just with what's gone on.
Okay, thank you. Could I just explain that under our constitution, if 4 members of the committee stand up, the matter is automatically sent to the District Development Committee, which is our senior planning committee. So it will go up to District Development without a recommendation. Okay, thank you. Get Councillor Whitbread back. I wish I had seen that, and I might well have made a decision one way or the other, but I didn't feel a bit confident that other people had seen it and I haven't.
DGMC?
Well, yeah. Yes, I sit on that. Also, I have to go and look at it.
That's it. You can do it easier.
It might be a bit tall, that building, although here, the CGI doesn't look bad. There we go. Okay, right, Councillor Whitbread is back. We will now take item 3, which is 55 High Street, Epping. Jill?
Thank you. 55 High Street, Epping. This is an application for redevelopment of the existing shop, including a new shop front with a flat above, and involving alteration and refurbishment of the existing building, and the erection of a 2-storey detached building in the rear garden to provide 2 flats. The site is, as you can see, basically this is Tesco's here, and Tesco's car park, and it's one of the shop units in this area here. It's this unit here, so you can see from the aerial photo development in the rear of the adjacent property. This is the existing elevations, front and rear elevation, side elevation of the shop unit. So at the moment there's the shop window and doorway, and then there's a doorway here which is the access to the upper flat. It runs in and there's up the stairs to the flat above. The proposal is to amend the shop front. There will still be a door in this position, but instead of leading up to the flat, it will go through the building and out into the yard area at the rear. And the rear of the building is being altered to provide cycle parking and bin storage. There will still be a usable shop area with a WC and storage area, and the access to the upper flat will now be off the proposed access here, so new stair being provided within the building. And then at the rear, actually this probably shows better, the rear is proposed to build a detached building which just contains 2 one-bedroom flats. So this is the floor plan of the proposed building, so access with stairs up to the first floor, and you can see the design is quite simple. To keep the height down, they've got the dual pitch, and it's similar, it's the same height as the building that's in the next door plot, which is also flats. And the rear overlooks the car park for Tesco's. And that was just to show the existing shop unit. Broadly, again, this is a town centre location where flats above shops are appropriate, and additional. Well, again, we're looking to make the best use of existing urban land, provided that doesn't result in any harm. There's no impact on no adverse impact on the street scene from the proposal. The design is considered acceptable. The other issue is that the 3 flats proposed will not have any parking, but again, in this location, and certainly for the flats above shops and behind shops, in the high street where it's easy walking distance to the tube, it's not considered necessary to have parking facilities. So the application is recommended for approval, again subject to that legal agreement for mitigation in relation to the Epping Forest SAC.
Thank you. We have one speaker, Councillor Scruton again, for Epping Town Council.
Yeah. Well, the committee strongly object to this application. It's quite simple. The proposal is an overdevelopment of the site in terms of bulk, scale and density. There is a question of access to the two new flats at the back of the property. There seems to be only one front access to the shop and one front access to the existing flat upstairs. So I think we were a little bit concerned about that. There does not seem to be any provision for access for refuse collection. And although I think in the notes there says there is, but can you imagine with the flats and all the wheelie bins, them all lined out the front, outside the front of the shop? I just have this image of wheelie bins along the front of the shop. There's no provision for vehicle parking for the two new flats, even though the property is located near other forms of transport with cycle provision at the development. There is every likelihood that the residents in the two new proposed flats will own vehicles, even though the development is in an urban area. There are existing car park facilities in the town, but the provision in the area is quite inadequate. This will exacerbate the already severe parking issue in Epping. We do keep talking about parking, but I think it is an issue that we have to consider. The insufficient parking from this scheme will put additional pressure on the surrounding roads. National and local policies seek to protect the quality of the urban environment. The additional pressure on parking will reduce the quality of the urban environment in neighbouring roads. Developments now should not result in reduced quality of life for future generations. To summarise, the committee strongly object to this development on the grounds of overdevelopment, lack of amenity, accessibility to the site and parking provision. I will comment, though, that the committee welcomes the refurbishment of the existing property, as they agree that the shopfront does need an update. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, the recommended decision is to grant permission subject to legal agreement. Councillors. Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. Very difficult decision when we went and had a look at this one. Very, very tight site. When we accessed the property, walked through to the rear, we could see that it was going to be a squeeze putting something in. I'd just like to ask the officers, are we able to put a condition on that we only, because there's only two one-bedroom flats and they're very, very small, that we condition that there's only have one large black bin, one large green bin for the property, but to be shared between the two? Or do they have to have independent bins?
I have no idea, but I don't think it's a planning issue as such. It would be for the waste people to decide.
Okay, Councillor Bedford.
Yeah, okay. Then in coming back on that, we did consider what would happen when you pull the bins out onto the street. So I think that that's something that should be borne in mind if we're looking at these properties. However, there is adequate room on the street for the bins, and as all the other businesses down there obviously provide them, and there is other accommodation in the same street. On balance, I felt that it's a difficult decision because it is such a tight site, and I almost felt like we were going back to 1666, just before we had a little fire, where we had properties crammed in so tight together. We just lost control of building. I do think, though, on balance, we do need small accommodation units in Epping, and I think on balance I support the application.
Thank you. Councillor Whitbread.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I think Councillor Bedford has actually hit the nail on the head here. It's cramming a lot onto that particular site. I know these properties particularly well, and even though I wasn't able to go on a site visit on Saturday, I know the location, I know the makeup of the property. Parking, as we heard earlier, is a consideration we have to take into it. We can't take into account on these planning applications, and the property does sit within a CPZ. So to a degree that answers the parking issues. But just my personal feeling on balance, this is just too much on this site. I really do think it is crammed in.
Thank you. Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I was on the site visit as well, and it was very instructive to see through there. To be fair to this, I have no problems with the refurbishment of the shop. I have no problems with the putting a passageway down the side. I have no problems with the flat above the shop. I actually also have no problems with the principle of some residential development in the back garden. I just think that what's in there, given the size, and it struck me when we were standing in the backyard, quite how narrow that backyard actually was and how little space there was on either side. I've had a glance at the plans. I think it's a maximum of 1 metre between the edge of that two flatted property across. I think this is just too much in there. I think in terms of what you're trying to get in, it's a cramped form of development. If something came forward for slightly less, that could actually be better spaced within the back garden, I think I'd feel much better about that. And as such, I can't see enough positives in this to make it something that I would want to support, and as such, I will not support this application.
Okay, thank you. Any other councillor have a view? In which case we will go to the vote. The recommended decision is to grant permission. All those in favour?
It's none, Chairman.
Those against?
$12, Chairman.
And abstentions?
4, Chairman.
Thank you. In which case we need a proposal for refusal. Would someone like to... Councillor Whitbread.
I believe it's overdevelopment of the site and the amenity space is inadequate.
Jill, are we happy with that? Overdevelopment and lack of amenity space.
Never too keen on just saying overdevelopment, but yeah, cramped form of development with that. Yeah. Yep.
Councillor Phillip. Oh, sorry.
Jim, could we possibly add design into that? Because I think it's the design of what you've got in there that leads to that cramped form of development. I think that's something that we would want to see.
Okay. Add design? Inadequate? Yes. Sure.
Unsuitable.
Unsuitable. Yes. Okay. That proposal for refusal then is in front of you. Those in favour of refusing for that reason?
$13.
Those against?
None, Chairman.
And abstentions? No, I voted again. I voted for the...
So it was 14 and it was 3. Sorry.
Right.
Abstentions.
Okay, thank you. In which case planning permission is refused. If there is a way forward, it does seem that from what the councillor said who'd been on the site visit, that a smaller development in the rear garden, the rear yard, would probably be far more acceptable. Thank you. We will now go on to item 4, which is Banson's Lane, Ongo. It's all right, wait.
Item 4 then, this was another one that we've done a site visit for, members' site visit on Saturday. The application is for the erection of 7 two-bedroom units with associated car parking, cycle store, bin store and landscaping, and it provides 8 parking spaces for these 7 flats. The site that's proposed to be developed is this area. This area is to remain essentially undeveloped. Originally, when the application came in, part of the land was to be the garden area for the proposed flats, but it was actually felt and advised by officers that it would be better to leave this area undeveloped, not turn into formal gardens, because it has more amenity value generally from the existing vegetation that's on it. So again, the site is this area here, which is opposite the car park for the supermarket, and the proposal is for a flatted development the layout which is shown here. The parking is underneath the residential accommodation, so this is the sort of lower ground floor, and it has, as I say, 8 parking spaces and cycle storage. There's a bin store proposed here on the frontage. Pedestrian access to the site is through here. The units are 2-bedroom, and the layout can be seen there, fairly standard form of layout. And the proposal is for a split height development. So this is the element that faces towards the open space, so it drops down from the higher level behind to the lower level as it faces onto the greenbelt area. This is the access to the parking. At the other side, we've got 2 gables and the pedestrian access, and the side elevations show a little better how it relates to the fall in the land. So this is the higher element, which is adjacent to the telephone exchange building, which again is quite a significant building, and it drops down as the land falls away. So in street scene terms, again, this is the element that's facing towards the green belt and the open space, but it will be largely hidden by the vegetation on that open space, and that's the side elevation in relation to the nearest building as you come down Banson Lane. So you can see that the height is not excessive in that respect. Just a few photos to see where it is. So it's in this area. That's the existing pedestrian access between the telephone exchange and the site. These tall trees along that boundary will go as a result of the development. But the tree officer has looked at these and doesn't consider that they have long-term life expectancy, and although they have amenity value at the moment, doesn't feel that they're worthy of protection via a preservation order. This is the hard surfaced area of the site and office building behind, so it's a relatively small site, and again looking towards the telephone exchange. This is the view from the greenbelt, looking back towards the lane, and again across the field, so you can see other existing development that's just a bit further over from the site, and that's how it looks in the landscape. Again, just a longer shot, and a photo montage that's been provided by the applicant to show how the proposed development, which is here, would relate to adjoining developments. So overall, we think the design has been well thought out. It provides good quality housing at within the block. Adequate parking space in this location, so it's 1 space per unit plus an additional unit, which is felt to be appropriate here. And the application is recommended for approval, subject again to the legal agreement for mitigation on the SAC.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers. Our first speaker is Mr. Martin Patty, an objector.
Thank you, Chairman. Many of you
here will be familiar with me speaking in favour of developments in the past, but I'm here today to strongly object to this proposal for 7 flats and underground parking. Although there are only 6 objectors on the officer's report, I have received support for my objections from the Ongar Neighbourhood Plan Community Group, who work in close association with Ongar Town Council. Ongar Town Council also do not now wish to comment on applications. I am therefore the only person able to speak tonight to represent the objectors' views. This is a small site of approximately 25 metres by 15 metres, and the applicant is proposing to build on 95% of this application site, which is a gross overdevelopment. This will result in the loss of this section of woodland, which currently has 46 trees on it, of which 23 are an avenue of lime trees, separating our offices and Sainsbury's to the south. The loss of an area of woodland such as this, including all of its 46 trees, should be grounds for refusal of consent alone. Whilst the area of land for the application site has 2 parts, the part which is being built on is the main part of the development, and the remainder is not linked to this application site, albeit that the application is proposing to do additional planting on it. If this goes ahead, this will mean the loss of all the trees, excavating into a bank with excavations of approximately 3 metres deep in order to provide underground car parking for this development. All of this site is within the conservation area, and it is a very exposed site next to the Essex Way, which is the historic long walk up to Grinstead Church and in the Cripsey Brook Valley. Currently all of these trees screen the telephone exchange and other buildings. Whilst I acknowledge that my offices are adjacent to this site, I am speaking tonight as a resident of Ongar for the past 60 years, and I feel that it is important that this site with its trees is retained as an essential part of the conservation area. As a group value, this is an important area of woodland which needs to be retained. The avenue of lime trees have been in existence for at least 40 years, and I've taken advice and these could easily survive for another 40 years with landscape management. The development will be very visible and be 2 to 3 times higher than our offices, which were the old Ongar Doctor's Surgery. This will be a very dominant feature in the landscape and should not be acceptable in a sensitive part of the conservation area where tree areas are rare. For a building to be built on almost 95% of the area of a plot is gross overdevelopment, and the fact that there is a need for underground car parking proves this point. 46 trees to be lost for the gain of 7 flats is not, in my view, acceptable on a small site such as this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Pryor, who is the applicant's agent. Mr. Pryor.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Nick Pryor, partner at JTS Partnership. This is a father and son development team who live locally and who take a pride in their developments, such as Ongar Road Crematorium. The same attention to quality and detail is intended here. The scheme evolved over 12 months of discussions and contributions from officers, with key focus on conservation and landscape to achieve a particularly well-designed scheme. As officers put it, the building demonstrates a good understanding of its context, drawing on architectural references from the surrounding buildings and conforming with the height, scale and general transitional appearance. Mr. Patty makes the unfounded criticism that it's overdevelopment, but it has got to be seen in its whole context. And you saw from the photo montage that was put up, there is actually only little glimpse views of it. The lime trees actually don't make a big contribution to the character of the conservation area here. And that photo montage was accurate. It shows the skyline trees beyond. So it actually will contribute significantly. They are all in poor condition. That is agreed between the arboricultural officer and our own arboricultural advice. In terms of parking, what better than to achieve undercroft parking, easily facilitated on a sloping site where you don't see it. And I'm surprised at Mr. Patty making that objection when he himself constantly brings forward developments with undercroft car parking. So, in dealing with this, members will be aware of the latest revisions of the MPPF This is exactly the sort of site and development that conforms to all these policy objectives of the government. There are many positive benefits to the character of the conservation area, and no objections received from the town council. And although reference is made to the town council not making objections on this particular application, we had dealt with them at all stages, all the way through, and there were no previous objections, and on this one we spoke with them. Your officers provide a robust recommendation, and this isn't one of balance, as was referred to earlier this evening. It's a great little scheme, it's cracking, it contributes, and I have no hesitation in recommending it to you. So hopefully, members, you will be able to go with this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bedford.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually proposed that we did this site visit, and the reason I proposed it was because of the comments we'd received from various residents about the impact on the Essex Way. I found the site visit actually very eye-opening, in as much as that when we actually walked over to the Essex Way side and we looked back, we couldn't help but recognise the houses of a similar nature which are actually in plain view to the left, which have more of an impact probably on the Essex Way than this development does. Going back to the actual development site itself, it did look like it was a good use of space next to a very ugly building, the Exchange. The loss of trees didn't impact too much, and I thought that actually reducing the build on the site to that one small area on the right and leaving the copse stroke small wooded area in front of it was a good move, because it actually does two effects. One, it shields the development from the Essex Way and keeps that shield in place, although you're only going to see the very top of it, but also it shields the children's skate park, which is just down from it. Overall, I thought it was a good use of the space, and I'm quite happy with the development. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Chairman, yes, I too visited the site on Saturday. I must say it's a pity more members don't attend site visits, but there we are. I found that it was well worthwhile. It was a good design. It fits in well to that site. Being mentioned about the trees been coming down. Well, most of those trees are no value at all. In fact, some of the taller ones near the end of their life, and they're on the lean towards a telephone exchange. So I'm fully supporting it. There was mention about slow worms on the skate park. I don't know what that has to do with as one of the objectors, but I can't see what that has to do with the application. So I fully support the application.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Yes, Councillor Phillip.
Chairman, I try not to repeat things that have been said already. I also was on the site visit. I do think the underground parking in this location is actually a very positive use of space. It's something that we have traditionally not been very good at in this country, unlike perhaps some people across the channel, where underground car parking is much more recognised. Making use of underground area rather than taking above ground reduces the impact on the openness of a site. I think, as was already been mentioned, keeping the copse in its place, which is part of the site of this development, and so it is not 95%, makes a lot of sense. I agree with what Councillor Bedford was saying about the Essex Way. All in all, I think this is a development I can quite happily support.
Thank you. If no other councillors wish to speak, we will go straight to the vote then. The recommended decision... Oh, I'm sorry. I do apologise. Councillor Bolton, I do apologise.
No, I attended the site visit. I'm a bit confused about the statement that 46 trees would go. I certainly couldn't identify 46 trees that would be removed if the copse to one side of the site is retained.
Well, I'm not sure whether I can shed any light on that. I mean, it's the number of trees that are actually on the footprint of the building. And although I know the site very well, I haven't counted the number of trees that are there, so I'm afraid I can't count. I can't do it. Councillor Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. I didn't make the site visit, so I'll abstain on this one, but I just wanted to check. A couple of members have talked about the importance of retention of the copse in front of the development. I mean, is that covered by condition 13? That will ensure that that is retained, will it?
Yes? Good. I'm happy with 13.
Yes. It's part of the site, so yes, they're protected.
Yes? Yes. Although it is a peculiar site that it has an access through the middle, the site is in fact in two parts, if you like, but is part of a whole, and that is therefore covered. Okay. In which case, we'll go straight to the vote. The recommended decision is to grant permission. All those in favour, please show.
Chairman.
Against?
None, Chairman.
Abstentions?
3, Chairman.
In which case planning permission is granted. I note that there is an archaeological survey to take place there. I did some of my archaeological training where Sainsbury's is now, and we didn't find much, I've got to say, and I doubt if we will on this site either, but we must try. Number 5. Yes, I was asked for declaration of interest. Councillor Whitbread, do you have any declarations of interest?
No declarations and apologies for lateness.
That's right, we're pleased to see you. Jill, item number 5, Hyde's Riding School, Abridge Road, Thaden Boys.
Thank you. Item 5 then is for the removal of an existing caravan and stable building and the erection of a security hut to be used as ancillary 24-hour security for the riding school. The location, again, shown here. These are the stables. There's a menage there. And again, in aerial, just trying to locate it. So, yeah, the riding school and surrounding fields. There's a block of stables here and a small block of 3 stables here and a caravan on site. Again, it's a better view of it. The proposal is to remove the existing stable block here and replace it with a building of a similar size, which will be a 2-bedroom unit for security purposes. So that's it. That's the existing block of 3 stables, and this is a small security hut with 2 small bedrooms and a sort of general area. Within it, again, photos of the site. So these are the main stable blocks. That's the 3 stable unit that's to be removed, and that's an existing caravan which is not there lawfully, I don't believe, which it's proposed to remove also. So again, stable block, caravan, both to go, and to be replaced by a building of similar size to the stable block for use by security staff. It is within the green belt. The main issue is whether or not it would have a greater impact on the openness of the green belt than the existing stable. The answer to which is really no. And it's proposed that we grant consent subject to conditions which are set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. We have 2 speakers. Our first speaker is Councillor Peter Gooch from the Town Council. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Chairman, members. The Parish Council is unable to support this. We feel this is a disproportionately large building for its purpose. It is a materially larger building than the one it replaces, and it is in a different use. It is therefore contrary to the provisions of paragraph 145 of the MPPS, policy GB2A of the local plan, and DM4 of the new submitted plan. We strongly disagree with the planning officer's assertion that a security hut is ancillary use with a riding stable. We think security hut is just too generalised You know, are we really going to say a security hut on a sports field or a golf course is going to be ancillary to that use? We just don't see that. And it certainly isn't infilling. You can see this is not in between two buildings. So we come back that we feel this is inappropriate development without any very special circumstances to support it. We really question whether 24-hour security is really necessary. Is this site really being targeted that much that it needs 2 security officers on 24-hour huts? This is not a security hut. This is the size of a 2-bedroom bungalow. We feel that if this building was perhaps the size of the stable block, which is being removed, then perhaps it would be acceptable and more proportionate. We also have a difficulty with the condition which has been placed, condition number 4. It basically says that the building hereby shall only be used for purposes of periodic accommodation by the security staff. The dictionary definition of periodic is a happening or recurring at intervals or intermittent use. However, clearly the applicant is asking for 24-hour use round the clock, so we're not sure how that's going to work. We think it's too big. We just don't feel it can be justified. Thank you.
Thank you. Second speaker on this application is Mr. Charlie Biss, the applicant's agent.
Yes, good evening. Well, as you've just been told, this application is for the removal of an existing mobile home and the removal of an existing permanent structure currently used as a stable and the erection of a small ancillary building for the purpose of overnight accommodation for the stable staff. The reason for this is to improve security at the stables, which are on occasion subject to vandalism and theft of valuable horses. The current stables are in existing and lawful use, and the business has been in place for a number of years. This application is response to an ongoing and probably increasing problem, particularly people crashing in from the M11, funnily enough. This is not an application for a house, it's for ancillary accommodation to the existing stables. It's too small for a house, it's 450 square feet. It's the same size, plus or minus 10% or something, as the stable block we're taking down. The proposal is, as I say, slightly larger than the block to be removed, and when considered with the mobile home, considerably less actually. Consequently, the openness of the reality is that the openness of the green belt will be increased. The design will complement the existing buildings and will enhance the rural character of the area, including additional landscape and removal of hard standing. This is not going to be like a nightclub with bouncers. It's going to be occupied by existing staff who will quite reasonably want to change and maybe watch TV and have a bite to eat and stay the night. There's not going to be a security force arriving, and there'll be no increase in traffic or movement on site. The application is compliant with emerging planning policy and also NPPF guidance. The proposed building will be of sustainable construction and will be energy efficient. This is a good little business that serves the local community well. And as we've pointed out to officers, there are a number of similar situations, Toot Hill, for example, where existing riding stables have ancillary accommodation for overnight stays. We do agree with the suggested conditions, although I take the point that periodic can be read many different ways, but we agree generally with the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, the recommended decision is to grant permission. Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for both the speakers. And I have to say that I found Mr. Biss's contribution particularly interesting. He said, this is for overnight accommodation for the stable staff. That is not a security hut. It would have been very useful if the description of the application that's coming forward had actually described what is actually being asked for. A house for existing stable staff. A security hut, one might imagine, would be reasonable. It wouldn't be particularly big. when long in my dim and distant past I did security. We did have a kettle, that was about it. I'm not sure there was many microwaves in those days, but we were in a gate hut. I don't see the purpose of 2 bedrooms in a security hut. I don't see a large kitchen, open space, and WC, I'll grant them, is maybe a reasonable thing. It's not a security hut, it's ancillary accommodation that they're applying for. And I don't believe this is ancillary. I believe this is effectively putting in a new dwelling, because we said overnight accommodation for stable staff, that is accommodation. It's not a particularly small building. The dimensions here are 9 metres by 5 metres, and just for comparison, the 2 flatted development in the back of Epping that we refused earlier is 5 metres the same. It's 13 metres rather than 9 metres. It's not small. Mr. Biss referred at least twice to the mobile home that's on the site, which, as the planning officer pointed out, is actually not there legally, and therefore we should ignore it. Chairman, I can't see this being anything other than trying to achieve a new dwelling within the Greenbelt, trying to capitalise on potential illegal behaviour. If a small security hut that allowed somebody to be in there, perhaps even with a toilet, to see through the hours of darkness when there might be incursions onto the ground, I could see that might be reasonable. This, I believe, is completely unreasonable, and I would like to propose a refusal of this application on the grounds that it's an inappropriate development in the Greenbelt.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. As always, Councillor Phillip has very eloquently read many of my comments that I've sat here for the last 2 minutes and ticked off, but I won't repeat them, nor indeed the very good points that Councillor Gooch made. I can only agree. A security hut, in my mind, is a security hut. It provides a base for a security guard to be on duty when he's not patrolling the premises. It provides space for monitoring equipment that's necessary, maybe the kettle, the microwave. I just see no reason for sleeping accommodation to be included. And again, remind councillors, as Councillor Phillips said, the current mobile home stroke caravan is there, in our opinion, unlawfully, so therefore should not be any part of this discussion. When I first read this report, I was absolutely amazed when I got to the end and found it was recommending for granting. I think it's absolutely fairly outrageous, if I'm perfectly honest. One final thing, the officer does point out that associated, on page 87, associated essential small-scale buildings. Yes, it's associated. It is not essential to be this size, so I can only disagree very strongly with that. Interested to see any other comments, but I will happily second Councillor Phillips' proposal for refusal on this.
Thank you. Councillor Bedford.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very quick. So, question to the officer. Is it correct that there is only a toilet facility there? There's no bathroom facilities at all, no showering facilities? If we can just confirm that, please.
We've only got what you can see on the plan, which just it refers to a WC.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Grigg. Oh, sure.
For the purposes of clarity for me, if this was granted and they demolished the stable block and then later they decided they needed to have a stable block again, would the fact that they've already demolished one count against them? Or would it be a case of the committee makes the decision?
Jill?
It would be looked at on its merits. I can't say no, it would never be allowed, but when there's already a large number of stables there, a small additional stable block may still be considered appropriate.
Now, as a matter of order, should I take your proposal for refusal first? Yes? Okay. In which case there is a proposal for refusal. proposed by Councillor Phillips, seconded by Councillor Jones. All those in favour of a refusal, please show.
Chairman.
Those against?
None. Oh, one.
And abstentions?
That's one.
Also one. In which case, we need to have a reason for refusal. Councillor Phillip, would you like
Chairman,
to...
I gave you a reason before we went to the vote, just to be correct on procedure, that we voted to refuse on the basis that it was an inappropriate development in the green belt.
Okay, have you had that? In which case, planning permission is refused. Item 5. 6, is that the one that's been withdrawn?
Yes.
Yes? Right. Item 6, which is 35 The Magpies, Epping Green. We're not Empire Building here. It turns out it's not in our remit because it's not in our area, so that's been referred to Plans West, and they can deal with that one. We will therefore move on to item 7, which is 1 Mount End Road, Thaden Mount. We have several members who are going to withdraw. Thank you, John.
Thank you. 1 Mount End. Members may remember this one.
What site was it?
Came to committee a couple of months ago and was deferred for a site visit, which was carried out, and then was deferred from the next agenda because we had an appeal decision in on the previous application, which we had sight of, I think, on the day of the committee, and we felt we needed to assess the implications of that appeal decision and set that out in the report to you. So there's been a bit of a delay. So the application is for demolition of a large, partly open-sided barn and the erection of 2 detached houses. And it's a revised application following the refusal of an earlier application which has also been dismissed on appeal. So the site is, as you see, there are listed barns on the adjacent site here. This is the large barn building which does not have an agricultural use, so as such it's regarded as previously developed land, and therefore it's appropriate, or not inappropriate, in Greenbelt terms to allow redevelopment of the site, provided the redevelopment doesn't have a greater impact on openness. The proposal is to erect 2 dwellings on the site. Actually, this is probably better because that shows the position of the existing barn. To provide 2 dwellings on the site with parking, access past the fronting dwelling here. And the proposal is shown there. So this are 2 barns, 2 houses that are designed to look like barn conversions, really, so to fit in with the rural area. This design is a result of a great deal of negotiation with our conservation officer to ensure that the design doesn't have an adverse impact, particularly on the setting of the listed building, but also on the rural character of the area. And it's a significant change from the original proposal, which has been dismissed on appeal, in that the design of the barns has been changed quite significantly, and large parts of the barn, of the houses are now single-storey rather than 2-storey, and overall the design is much better, and the ridge lines are lower, and the impact on the area visually is significantly less. I have somewhere at the end of here got something to show that, hopefully. Yeah, so that's the refused application, which was essentially just two-storey houses, very blocky, with two-storey sections coming out the back as well, which also I think made it more visually prominent from the adjacent property. The revised proposal, say, brings the ridge height down a bit, but more importantly, the additional areas are single-storey. So that's these elements. So with those changes, we do feel that the development is acceptable. The appeal decision, the inspector did raise concern about the change of use as he saw it, I think, of the adjacent land, which is just open land, but it clearly has been used as sort of garden area and so forth in connection with the site, and we've accepted that it forms part of the previously developed land and has not been in agricultural use. So that's the barn as it stands at the moment, which you can see is quite a large and imposing barn building. Although much of it is open, it could be enclosed without really, I mean, it wouldn't increase the volume of the building to enclose it, and that would be acceptable generally. So it's felt that the redevelopment of the site for two smaller barn-like dwellings would be acceptable in this location. Yeah, that's it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question? Jill, you said that the barn is not considered to be agricultural. Could you just explain that to the committee?
Yes, I think. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the report, but I think it's been used in connection with horse keeping rather than any agricultural use.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. We have three speakers. Our first speaker is Mrs. Sally Crone, who is an objector. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Chairman and members. We are the immediate neighbours of the proposed development. Our home and garden presently is not overlooked, being private and tranquil with open views across the fields to Epping. The surroundings are very much rural in nature. This is the second application for this site. The first one was refused earlier this year and also dismissed on appeal. This second application basically turns one of the buildings through 90 degrees and changes the look of the properties with minor changes to the design, but they remain two large, imposing properties. Note the plans for this application were submitted on the 6th of August, but the appeal decision was dated the 28th of August, so this application cannot have taken the planning inspector's comments and decision into account. The applicant has failed to overcome the two reasons for refusal that the planning inspector gave. Firstly, and put simply, the applicant is unable to fit two such large houses on the footprint of the existing building, which means that they continue wanting to extend the new footprint into the green field immediately beyond the building, adversely affecting the visual and spatial dimensions of the area, as the planning inspector concluded. This includes the proposed garden areas, which have been uncultivated open field for the 10 years we have lived there, just rough grass grazed occasionally by sheep. Secondly, the size of the proposed buildings is overbearing on both the Grade 2 listed Thaden Barn on one side and our property on the other side, harming the character and appearance of the area. The applicant will put great store on the recent application to convert a building adjacent to the neighbouring Thaden Barn, but this was a conversion of an existing very low-rise single-storey rustic building which did not extend beyond its current footprint, so it is not a direct comparable and is not relevant. We remain opposed to a bulky, imposing and overpowering development which over-intensifies residential use where there presently is none, that is out of keeping with the surrounding rural area and fails to comply with planning law. While the applicant is claiming that they have addressed the reasons for refusal given by the planning inspector, this application continues to harm the greenbelt and also the character and appearance of the area, and there are no exceptional circumstances to justify this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Cole from the Parish Council.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Thaden Parish Council is very concerned about the number of developments in our area, but we accept the new planning regulations. But the other two that are currently before the Planning Committee all maintain their development in the existing footprint of the redundant properties, whereas this does considerably exceed the footprint that is proposed. So our objection is overdevelopment of the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our third speaker is Mr. Robert Shaw, the applicant. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Good evening, councillors. Epping Forest's planning and conservation teams have conducted an extensive analysis of this revised scheme and have recommended it for approval. An earlier scheme, as you know, was rejected and we appealed that decision unsuccessfully. The scheme before you today has addressed all the reasons for refusal within the appeal decision and now has the recommendation of both Epping Forest Conservation Team and planning officers. Firstly, the previous scheme was considered to be too residential in appearance. The new scheme, as you can see, is designed to appear as renovated barns in a courtyard arrangement, which is fully supported. Secondly, the scale and mass of the previous design was considered too massive and impactful on the openness of the greenbelt. In this revised scheme, approved by the Planning Department, the buildings are much lower, with more single-storey elements, which addresses this concern. Thirdly, regarding the setting of the Grade 2 listed building, Thaden Barn, the previous application was considered an alien form of development with an urban layout. The revised scheme, approved by the Conservation Department, has a courtyard layout and reduced height and mass, which complements and is subservient to the adjacent Thaden Barn. Finally, the appeal officer's assessment was that the previous scheme would not be harmful to the living conditions of number 5 Thaden Mount and neighbours. The revised scheme is even smaller and therefore has no impact to number 5. We believe the revised scheme addresses all of the concerns raised. Planning officers and conservation officers all agree and are recommending approval. To conclude, I quote from the planning officer's report. It is accepted that the existing building constitutes previously developed land and that the residential development is appropriate. As the proposals involve a decrease in both the footprint and volume of buildings on the site and a reduction in the maximum ridge height, there are merits in replacing the large existing barn with a smaller built form. It is believed that the construction of 2 dwellings that look like smaller renovated barns is the best option. The proposed scheme, as revised, demonstrates a good understanding of its context. And in light of all the above, planning officers and conservation officers give their support to the proposal and recommend that planning permission be granted. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Microphone, please. Thank you. Members, the recommended decision is to grant permission. Councillor Brady.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask members to turn to page 106 in front of them and read the first line of the conclusion by the planning officers, where you'll see that it says the issues are evidently finely balanced. Now, this is written after the inspector has refused the previous application, and so it's very important to take into account why he refused it and do what he says. Now, I do agree that this is a much, much better design. I do agree the design is far better and more suited to the countryside, and in that way, yes, it does fulfil one of the inspector's requests. However, on the other side, on the minus side, the main issues have still not been overcome of the size of these two buildings, which extend well beyond the footprint of the original barn. They're two very large, imposing four-bedroom houses, and it's intended that they're put very close to two listed buildings. So I think this isn't just a normal barn that we're talking about developing here. It's beside listed buildings, and we don't want those listed buildings to be overwhelmed by two very large new houses. The other problem is the two very large gardens that are planned for these houses. Yet again, nothing has been done about the size of the gardens. And I would ask people now to look at page 104, where the inspector's summings up his appeal decision, where he says in the second paragraph down on page 104, the proposal resulted in the building sprawling beyond the existing building. Then a bit further on, the extensive gardens with its related residential paraphernalia would alter the function of the surrounding land that contributes to the openness of the green belt. And again, further on down that page, at the end of the next paragraph down, the proposal introduces an alien form and type of development into the building settings which would affect the rural setting of Thaden Barn being the listed building. So this is where we do not feel that, or I do not feel, that these problems have been addressed. There's also mistakes here. There are mistakes of fact that the developer is saying. In the next few paragraphs, I think we're on 105 now, the next few paragraphs, the developer suggests, and I heard Ms. Shingler just suggest then, that we have accepted that this land has been previously used garden land. If you look at the map, it extends way out the back of the barn and into all the fields. Who in their right mind would develop a field into a garden beyond a barn? I have lived in that road for over 30 years. There's a footpath, so it fronts onto the road. One side there's a footpath which runs right beside this property. Been down there lots of times. In 30 years that has never been used as a garden, so I would ask you all to not think of that as a garden. You can see that the small square field beyond the barn, as you can see, it's got grass the same as the other fields, and it has been used by the neighbouring farmer for sheep, etc. Obviously in this last year it's been cut with a lawnmower very, very tidily, and it now looks as it hasn't looked in the previous 30 years. What I will say is that the owner of the property did use it for a couple of summers about, 8 years ago, as a polo field to practice with his polo ponies, so he did actually cut it then. But in 30 years, I've never seen any of that used as a garden. So the problem is, if those large gardens are still allowed as such, as we all know, gardens allow for all sorts of paraphernalia, and that was what the inspector was worried about. So I feel that there's too much on this very sensitive site, and I feel it would be more appropriate for the developer to come back with something with much smaller gardens, smaller buildings, or indeed one building, not two. But could I ask that, in case people are minded to go with it and pass it, that we could firstly look at introducing more conditions regarding the garden buildings, which the planning officers did say in the write-up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Phillip.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Brady, for that fairly exhaustive list. I feel that you've done to me much what I did to Councillor Jones earlier on. I think there are a number of things that do need to be called out, and if Councillor Brady wishes to propose refusal, at the end of this you'll find why I'm happy to second such a refusal. I think a whole number of things have come up. So in terms of the open aspect, it is in the green belt. The barn is sizable, but it's constrained over a particular footprint. You can see from the plans that the two houses go significantly outside that footprint. You can also see that the gardens included in that are significantly outside that footprint, and as both Councillor Brady and the Inspector said, the residential paraphernalia, and we have on this committee on a number of occasions taken that into account in terms of impact on the openness of the green belt. I take note of what the Conservation Officer says in terms of no adverse effect on the listed building, but I think the trade-off for that is actually an adverse effect on the neighbour. You can see from the barn that at the side closest to the neighbour, it is down at a single-storey level. You have a side impact on the neighbour from those new developments being significantly higher and looking over that side. I'm not convinced this has addressed the reasons for refusal. And the one other thing I'd like to point out in terms of the report, there's reference to the fallback position of effectively converting this barn into a residential development. I don't give it any weight to that at all, because if it did happen, I think that would constrain it with on the same site that we're on at the moment. Then we could have a proper discussion over whether the field behind the barn is actually residential curtilage at the moment, because I don't, like Councillor Brady, I don't believe it is. I think there are so many things wrong with this application that to do this in the green belt would impact the openness. It's not appropriate. It has an impact on the neighbours, and for those reasons, I will not support it.
Thank you. Councillor Stalker.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm in an even worse position in that Councillor Brady knocked off 5 things on my list, and Councillor Phillips just knocked off 2 of the other 3. One remaining is that the applicant, and I wrote it down, said that this new scheme has addressed all, and I underlined all, of the issues raised by the Inspector. If I refer members to page 105, the very first sentence, well, there's one that hasn't been addressed, the footprint of this site. And for that reason, I won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Any other councillor wish to speak? In which case, Councillor Brady, yes.
Well, so in that case, can I propose a refusal?
Yes.
On the grounds of, you can help me, but I don't know. Go on then, yes. Thank you.
I would say impact on the openness of the green belt, and therefore, by definition, inappropriate development within the green belt. I would also call out impact on the amenity of the neighbours. I think that's probably.
On the listed buildings?
I think we struggle with that one because of the Conservation Officer.
Oh, right. Sorry, Jill would like to speak on your last point, if you might.
Sorry, just with regard to impact on the neighbour, the larger scheme, the Inspector didn't consider that there was an adverse impact on amenity of the neighbours, and the revised scheme certainly has no overlooking windows facing the neighbour's property.
Councillor Phillips, perhaps that would be best left off of the reason.
With the greatest respect to the Inspector, who I know always gets things absolutely right, having stood in the back garden of the neighbour on the site visit and studied the plans, I believe there is the positioning and the size of that actually does still have an impact on the neighbour.
There we are. So we have impact on the openness of the green belt, inappropriate development, and the impact of the amenity of the neighbour. Yes, Councillor Brady.
Do we need to say, by way of the fact that the gardens are extending over the green belt, and by way of the fact that the large buildings are outside the original footprint of the barn? Yes?
Yes, we could certainly do that. I must admit I was somewhat worried myself by, I must say the design of the building I thought was excellent. If there was just one of them, it would be within the footprint and I'm sure would be acceptable, but the fact that there are two which go outside the original footprint and the garden space, to my mind, was one of the most worrying aspects of this application. We have a proposal for refusal. All those in favour, please show.
14.
Against? Obviously none. And abstentions? 1. In which case planning permission is refused. I would probably imagine if we were going to give a way forward, we would say that perhaps one building on that site may well be acceptable, but we don't have to. Right, thank you. We will now go on to item 8, which is 15 Vicarage Lane, North Weald. We'll wait to get our other councillors to return. And I thank those connected with this application for their patience. It has been a reasonably long meeting, but it could have been worse. Okay, Jill, away you go. Is anyone... Oh, sorry, go on.
Item 8 then is, I've forgotten where it is, 15 Vicarage Lane, North Weald, and the proposal is for a single-storey outbuilding to provide a gym facility, and it is retrospective, it's partly built, and the application is as a result of an enforcement visit down there following a complaint. So Vicarage Lane, the proposal is in the rear garden here, adjacent to the boundary with the property to the rear there, number 2, I think. Apologies. St Andrews, close, thank you. I have an aerial photograph. So essentially the development's going in here. This is the rear garage to the rear of, or outbuilding anyway, to the rear of number 2, St Andrews. Again, that's the position. And it's a straightforward, simple, flat-roofed gym building. The short elevation is adjacent to the rear of number 2, and it is, forgotten how high, 3.1 metres, I think, in height. So really the only issues here are whether it adversely impacts on surrounding neighbours, because it's not really visible within the street scene. It's at the back of the garden. It's not in the green belt. It's an appropriate ancillary outbuilding, which if it had a lower eaves height would be permitted development, but because it's higher, it requires planning permission. The neighbour at St Andrews Close has provided the photos. I must have got the wrong number there, I do apologise. It's number 2. Has provided these photos, which some of which are taken from his rear first floor windows or from the roof of his outbuilding, which show the additional height of the outbuilding above the height of his garage. Again, several of those photos. Given its position and the nature of the development, that additional, I think it's just over 50 centimetres, half a metre above the height of the adjacent garage. Given the distance from the habitable rooms in the adjacent property, we don't think that that causes excessive harm to amenity, which is the what the policy says. We can only refuse things if they have excessive harm to residential amenity. that extra 0.5 metre in height we don't consider will result in any harm. The neighbour is also concerned regarding the proximity to the rear boundary and the back wall of his development. Both developments are on the boundary. There's no planning policy to prevent development adjacent to somebody else's property. As I say, if it was a lower height, he could build it in any case under permitted development. So broadly, although we have received an objection from the neighbour and from the parish council, we don't consider that there are planning grounds to refuse, and the application is recommended for approval. I would point out it is only half built, and it will be, the intention is to finish it with rendering, so that in the end it won't look like it does at the moment. Thank you.
Jill, could we see a ground plan of that as to how it fits into the garden?
Yeah, there.
It's there, right? Okay, because I noticed on the plan that we've been given, there doesn't seem to be an outbuilding in the property in St Andrew's Close.
No, it's an old thing, but actually most of the rear garden of St Andrew's Close there has a very large outbuilding within it. But
okay, thank you.
Some distance, as I say, the distance from the actual main part of the dwelling with the first floor windows is considerable.
Okay, thank you. If perhaps that ground plan would be useful. We have 3 speakers. The first is Mr. Billett, who is an objector. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Right. Good evening. I'm Kevin Billett, and I have lived at 2 St Andrew's Close 54 years. My garage was built with planning permission 38 years ago. There was built to the boundary line. I oppose this application because the outbuilding has been built against my garage wall. The building started without informing me or the council, and the respective planning is being sought. The outbuilding roof is 2 foot higher than my garage. My fascia board has been blocked and I cannot do repairs to my garage and my garage wall. The detrimental impact of the flat roof can be seen by my photo submitted. The outbuilding back wall cannot be rendered. My garden is a lot shorter than 15 Brickley's Lane, making my views of the outbuilding more obvious from my house, overbearing and detrimental to my original amenity. I object this building against my garage wall. He has given access to 3 sides of the outbuilding except the rear wall, which is built against my garage wall, stopping my access for repairs and maintenance. Please refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker is Councillor Jackman from the Parish Council. Microphone, please. No, it hasn't worked, sorry. That's it, otherwise we won't get the webcast.
Right, this evening I'm representing North Weald Bassett Parish Council in respect of this application to which we wish to object. The Parish Council believes it is detrimental to the amenity of the adjacent residents at 2 St Andrew's Close and would also prevent both the applicant and the objector from maintaining the walls since they're so close together. And whilst you may not regard this as a pure planning reason, it just doesn't make common sense that people cannot maintain their own properties. I would also ask members to consider policy DM9 of the submission version of the local plan high quality design, which states the following. Privacy and amenity. 1. Avoid overlooking and loss of privacy detrimental to the living conditions of neighbouring residents. And 2. Should not result in an overbearing form of development which materially impacts on the outlook of neighbouring properties. North Weald Bassett Parish Council feels that this proposal would have a harmful impact on the residents who live at 2 St Andrew's Close. and we would hope that the councillors here this evening do not grant permission, but at the very least defer the matter until a site visit has taken place, when you can appreciate the position from both properties. If this suggestion is not agreed, then we would request that this application is refused and enforcement action taken to remove the structure already built in the garden of 15 Vicarage Lane without planning consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our third speaker is Victor Halls, the applicant.
I'm his wife speaking on behalf of Victor Halls. Sorry, I need some glasses. We have only lived in the bungalow for 5.5 years, but since moving there we have made a lot of alterations. As you can see, my husband needs a wheelchair. He has MS, and we need the gym that we've built for him to recover from the treatment that he's had earlier on this year. Due to his disability, he cannot get to the gym on his own without me or any of the family around him. We've all decided that this would be much better for him to be in the garden where we can all keep an eye on him. We previously had a garden shed where this one is now, but due to the damp, it couldn't be used as a gym for him. Therefore, we have had this new one built. We have put in planning permission. We didn't realise we needed it at first, and we do apologise for that. Due to the height, it has to be that high for the hoist to lift him from the machines that he needs to use. He can't physically get from one machine to another without help, so this is a reason. We stopped all building when we was told we was in the wrong. Sorry.
All right. Take your time.
Okay, sorry, that's it. No.
Do you want to stop there, or do you want to go on? You want to stop? Okay. Councillor Quigg.
Thank you, Chairman. I tried to look from the road, from both properties today. I've been away, and this is really my first opportunity to go and have a look. I think if this had been built under permitted development rights, it wouldn't have caused a problem. And because it's so close to the boundary, and although the objector has a garage there, the fact is a garage has to go there. If you look at the shape of his small garden, to put it anywhere else would mean that the garden would be unusable, and so that's why it's built there. The boundary is quite close to his house because it is a small garden, and therefore, because of the height of the building, which is a large building, I understand the purpose now of why the building is there, but because it's such a large building, that extra, which is a foot and 9 inches or something in old money, it has more of an impact. And I just think if this had been built to permitted development measurements, then the height would be just that bit lower and probably wouldn't have caused too much of a problem. However, it is making it difficult for the residents in St Andrews Close because of the height. So I don't know whether the officer could explain again about the permitted development heights and whether a couple of courses of breeze blocks couldn't be removed and the roof put on there, and everybody might be happy.
Yes, because it's quite close to the boundary, it could only be, I think, 2.5 metres high without requiring planning permission, which clearly wouldn't be high enough for the purpose that the applicant's wife has just explained, to get the hoist in and so forth. If it was away from the boundary by 2 metres, then they could build up to 4 metres in height without requiring planning permission, which would probably have a greater impact on the outlook from the neighbour than the current proposal. So, you know, you've got to balance what they could do against what they've done, and I think although it is adjacent to the wall, the impact is probably lesser than what they could do as permitted development just 2 metres away.
Thank you. Councillor Grigg, are you satisfied with that? Yes? Okay. Councillor Janet Whitehouse?
Thank you. I just wondered if you could explain a bit more about this building against another wall, because I assume it is built right up against the wall, so the question of maintenance, presumably there wouldn't be any maintenance because the other building is right up against it. I don't know. Is that what's being said?
Yeah, there's concern about maintenance, but as I say, that is just something that is not a planning issue, because anyone can build a 2-metre boundary wall right on their boundary, or even no matter what's on the other side of it, without requiring any consent, or they can build something under permitted development up to 2.5 metres high without requiring consent. We just don't look at the impact on maintenance. It's not a planning issue. There's a Party Wall Act that people have to follow with regard to erection of buildings, but that's a civil legal matter between the two owners and nothing to do with planning.
Okay. Councillor Brady?
Thank you. Just following on exactly from that, unless I'm misunderstanding, I can't see how the gentleman who lives in St Andrew's Close would have had access to the back of his garage anyway. If it was always somebody else's garden before, I can't see he had access to maintain it or do anything with it then. So I can't, from that angle, see it's any different. I just think this is so unfortunate. I just think this is such a shame that the people in Vicarage Lane didn't go to the planners first and get it all sorted out and perhaps trot round to the people that lived at the bottom of the garden and speak to them. I just think it is so unfortunate, because we've obviously got a very special circumstance here, haven't we? I remember we did a swimming pool once in Faden Boys that we covered over so that a very disabled girl could use that, and that was exceptional circumstances, and I think we may have another exceptional circumstance here. So I think it's very unfortunate. I'm not quite sure what the answer is. I think we may all have reached different conclusions, but I'll leave that to everybody else to decide.
I did hear the dreaded word site visit at one stage, but I don't know whether anyone wants to take that up. Apparently not. Well, the application is before us. The recommended decision is to grant permission with the conditions as listed. All those in favour, please show.
It's 9, Chairman.
And against?
3, Chairman.
And abstentions?
5, Chairman.
In which case planning permission is granted. We have no items to the exclusion of public and press. I would like to just make one comment and see what the committee think. The question of site visits, there was, when I first came onto this committee, occasionally site visits on weekdays. We've gone round to a situation where they're now Saturdays only, and I would just like to take a view from the committee as to whether they thought possible weekday site visits would be useful. Perhaps we can have a show of hands. Who would be for weekday site visits? Just, this is a guide. This is nothing else. Sorry? I'm afraid so. Yes. Yeah. So those who would be available and would be for weekdays. Yep. And those who would be against weekdays. 6. Nice try. 6. Yeah.
Working just slightly after working day.
Okay. The other option which has come forward is perhaps at the end of the working day during the week. So
6 o'clock.
Well, I don't think you were thinking of as late as 7, were you?
Well, between 6 and 7.
Between 6 and 7, certainly. Still working hours. Right. Okay. Well, we'll. Could you put your microphone on, please?
Chairman, perhaps the easiest way of doing it is just to see how many members can actually make different dates, and if it has to be a weekday and you can get more people there, great. If it's not, it's really difficult for myself. I, as my staff will say, it's the only day I ever do any work is on a Saturday. So, so it is difficult sometimes.
Okay. I appreciate there's no perfect answer to this because some of us will not be able to go during the week unless it's late in the evening, and others will find it easier to go during the week than the weekend. So, Brian.
Can I just say something in support of what Councillor Whitbread just said? Sorry. I must admit, in this discussion earlier, I didn't realise we had to come down one way or the other when it was first proposed. I thought it was a case of let's see what's available on the night, as Councillor Whitbread said. That would make more sense to me anyway. I mean, I'm in the fortunate position of being retired. Ostensibly, I can get there at any time, but it would be handy if we could be asked occasionally if we could have one there. There must be some times when some of you are there. Perhaps you give up your fortnight's holiday, John. So.
Okay. Well, perhaps then we could ask the planning department that perhaps when they float dates that one could be a weekday and one could be a Saturday, and let's see if we can get more people on one rather than the other. I appreciate the difficulties either way, and I'm not underestimating them. Okay. Councillor Morgan.
I think they should consult with you when they do have a planning site visit.
We'll pass rapidly over that one. Let's not make too big a point of that. Okay, all right, members, thank you very much indeed. This has been a late session, but we've gone on as quickly as we can, and I'd like to thank you for helping me tonight. Thank you. This meeting is now closed.